everybody, Stephen from Woolston Web Design here. I thought I would share with you a project that I did earlier in the year. It was a project for an electronic Easter egg hunt. If you're not sure, or if you're not familiar with what an Easter egg hunt is, usually it's with kids, but adults can do it as well. But it involves a series of clues, generally written on a piece of paper. Those clues are put in sort of secret locations with a bunch of Easter eggs, and people who are doing the hunt are given the first clue for where the first collection of eggs are hidden. And when they find those eggs, they get the eggs, and then the next clue is available there as well. And then they just keep going around finding clues. When they solve the clue, they find the eggs, and they get the next clue through to the end of the Easter egg hunt. So what I thought I would do is, instead of using paper clues, I would do it electronically. Specifically, the idea was that the kids would have a tablet. On that tablet, they would bring up a web page. That web page would give them a graphical clue, so nice, pretty background image with some clue text over the top of it. They look at the clue. They think about where the eggs would be hidden according to the clue. They go and find the eggs, and when they find the eggs, they say on the web page, they click a button which says I found the eggs, and that then gives them the next clue, and then they continue going through until they get to the end of the Easter egg hunt. So I was thinking about how to do this, and I could have done just like a static HTML page with some static text on it and some static pictures. I wasn't the only person who was involved in this. I was going to do, I did the website of it, but somebody else was doing the text and the pictures and so on. So a static page would probably work okay, but it would involve making changes when clues changed or when pictures changed and so on. So I needed some way that I could work on my part and the other person could work on their part. So what I decided to do was to use WordPress. Specifically, I was intending, and I ended up using the REST API functionality that WordPress gives. And if you're not familiar with what that is, WordPress have got some really good documentation. I'll put this link in the show notes. Essentially what it is that posts and pretty much any content that you put into the WordPress database, you can get back out via a REST API. So here, this is the documentation. Have a read through that, familiarize yourself with that. I won't go into detail on what is involved in this. Suffice to say, how to access it so that we can access the data that we need, consume it in JavaScript on our web page, and display it to the page. So the what I decided to do was I created the content on my own website, Woolston Web Design, woolston.com.au. So if I show you, this is the actual URL that the REST API makes the content available. So it's the URL of the WordPress site, and then wp-json/ blah 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 blah. Now this keyword here, this is the name of the post type that I want to retrieve. So I could make this post, I think it's post or posts. Let's see what this does. But essentially, this will give me every single post of the type post on the website. So what I decided to do was, instead of having this Easter egg hunt content conflict or sort of be combined with the other content that I have on my website, I decided to create a custom post type. And that custom post type was of type Easter. And I won't go into detail on how I did that. If you have any questions about that, feel free to hit me up, and I will give you some details on how to go about creating custom post types. But what you see here is all of the posts of type Easter that are going to be given to the website. So the if I show you, I'll go to the. I'm running a VM, so that thing keeps popping up when I try and go to the top of the page. So this is an example of one of the posts that we created. You can see I've created a menu item. These are all of the posts that relate to the Easter egg hunt. They have a specific category, but you can see that they're not mixed in with the other content that I have in my posts within the website, which was which was what I intended to do, because, like I said, I didn't want to have Easter egg hunt posts appearing in my blog roll on my website. So there was a bit of differentiation there. So this is the, I'll open this up again. Coincidentally, you might notice that the names or the titles of each of the posts relate to sports as well. The reason that we did that was because at the time, around Easter time, in Queensland, here in Australia, the Commonwealth Games were being held on the Gold Coast. So we decided to do the Easter egg hunt with a Commonwealth Games theme. So that's why each of the clues relate to a sport, and you can see the featured image has got a picture of a person playing basketball, and these are some of the mascots from the Commonwealth Games as well. So that's the background, and that's how we're storing the content. So let's get into how we go about doing the page. So what I've got here is I've just got a straight HTML page. I'm serving it up from this folder here. I'm using the npm HTTP server. If I go to the very top of this, you'll be able to see that. I'm running HTTP server, and it's serving up from that particular directory. So we're using this URL so that we can run the page. And this is what the page looks like. This is pretty much a boilerplate page. It's I'm using Bootstrap. I've brought in Bootstrap jQuery and the Bootstrap JavaScript files. I've got a slides, or a div of ID slides here, and this is where we're going to inject all of the slides which we're pulling from WordPress. So let's jump into it. Just also, I'm not going to go into a lot of the styling. I've already put all of the CSS styles into this CSS file. So as we go through and we put the markup into the page, the formatting is going to magically happen simply because we're already using this CSS file. Again, I'm going to post this to GitHub, so the CSS file and all of the resources and everything will all be available there. Okay, so let's go back to the page. So at the moment, this is what we have here. So F5, refresh, we've just got a background image, and that is this background image here. We've got some fonts which Bootstrap uses. We've got our Bootstrap CSS and source map file. We've got the Bootstrap JavaScript file, jQuery JavaScript file, and a stopwatch library as well, which we will cover when we get to it. So that's the state of play, and that's where we are. So let's jump in and get started. So let's get the WordPress data first. So let's create a function, and we'll call it get WP data. In fact, I might just, because like I said, I've already built this project, so I might just grab the content from GitHub and paste it in to try and make the screencast a little bit quicker. So bear with me, I'll pull up GitHub and I'll get the source, and I will be right back. And I'm back. Alright, so we'll create this function. First of all, we want to make sure that the function gets called. So let's put that in here. So on document ready, we will execute that function. So what do we want to put in that function? So first of all, we want to get the URL that we want to hit. So this is the URL that I showed you earlier in the web page. So that's going to give us that JSON list of posts. So now what we want to do is we want to get, we want to run an AJAX call. So I'm just using jQuery, which doing an AJAX call, doing a get, we're hitting this URL, and on success, we want to do something. We will close off the call. Alright, so what do we want to do? So we want to go off to WordPress, we want to pull back a JSON string, and then what we want to do is we want to get the first item, essentially. So what I thought that I would do is, instead of just going off to WordPress and getting a single post and then rendering that to the page, I thought what I would do is I would go off to WordPress once, I would get all of the posts that I need, and then I would just step through them. So like I said, as part of the hunt, when you find the clues, you click a button which then gives you the next clue. So what we'll do is we'll, on load of the page, we'll go off to WordPress, we'll pull back all of the posts, we'll store that in a JSON object, and then we will use that without any postbacks or anything else. We will use that for the rest of the, essentially, it's a game, the rest of the hunt. Alright, so in our success, what do we want to do when we successfully get content back? So we want to step through each of the items in the JSON string. We will get the item. So this is the individual clue, or the individual post. Okay, then what we want to do is we want to get the individual properties of that post. So we want to get the title. Oops. We want to get the content, and we also want to get the featured image, because the featured image is going to be like a backdrop to the clue. So the featured image, and we'll paste that in there. So this was a little bit tricky, and I had to do some research into how to do this. So from the JSON object, the post, you need to call this embedded, and then some tricky stuff here, which obviously returns an array. So then we want to get the first item of that array, and then we want the source URL of the first item of the array, and that will give us the HTTP URL for that featured image. So now we have all of the information that we need about the post. How are we going to structure this? So what I thought we'd do is we would have an overall div, which is for the slide. So that's just a slide container. In that slide, we would have a div for the image, and we would have another div for the content. So let's set that up. So we've got our individual items. So let's create a slide body element. So this is a div with ID slide, and because we're iterating through the items, we have an index here. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4. jQuery automatically gives that to us as part of the each method. So index is going to be for the first iteration, it's going to be 0, it's going to be 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. And I'm adding 1 because I don't want to start at 0. I want this to be div ID of slide 1. And then we'll just put some classes on that as well. And the hidden class is a bootstrap class, and by default that will hide the slide for me. So what we're doing is, this is the first time that we hit the page, we're going off to WordPress, we're pulling back each of the slides. Then what we're doing is we're setting up some HTML elements in the DOM, and I actually want them all to be hidden by default. And then what we will do is we will work out whereabouts in the stage of the hunt we are, and if we're on the 4th step, we will then unhide the 4th slide. Click next on the 4th slide, it'll take you to the 5th, which will then hide the 4th and unhide the 5th. Okay, so that's our slide container. Then what we will do is we will have our slide image, and I'm putting a style of background image with the URL to the featured image, which we got from up here. So that's going to give us a div with a background image of the featured image URL. So that's put into a single variable, and then I want to concatenate into that variable another div, which is going to be with a class of slide content, and that's going to have the content, which is the actual, if we go back to the slide, we'll have the content here in it. Alright, so it's starting to take shape. So then what we will do is, because this is our overall container, we actually want these to be, children, descendants of this slide. So we need to inject this variable into this. So we do that again using jQuery. So that's our element. It's a jQuery element, and I tend to put a $sign on my variables when they are a jQuery variable. So what we've done is we've said we want the slide body, this. We're going to inject this variable, the contents of this variable, into that body. And then what we want to do is we want to append this, the slide body, to our overall slides div, which we have set up here. So I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to save that. Let's go off to the page and see what we have. Now we probably will see nothing because each of those slides is hidden. But if we go to our DevTools, you can see here that we have slides, and it has the index in it. There's a slide image which has a background image of the URL, and then there's a slide content which is empty, strangely enough. That one's not. Not sure why that. Possibly that was by default. Possibly the first one is just an image, but we'll soon find out. So what we'll do is I can show you by removing that element. You can see that's exactly what we were looking for. If I do the same thing for the next one, and so this is essentially going from the first slide to the second slide. You can see here our featured image is in the background, and we've got our text over the top. So it's working nicely. So now what we need to do is we need to build in the functionality of moving from slide to slide. Actually, what we'll do is we won't do that. What we'll do is we'll pop up a. What I decided to do was to give an indication on how long it took for the kids to find the eggs for the clue. I decided to pop up a stopwatch. So as soon as the kids read the clue, they say go. The stopwatch starts. They go off and they run around and they try and solve the clue. And then when they find it, they say stop. And at that point, I'm pretty sure from memory, at that point, the stopwatch stops and the next slide is shown. So what we'll do is we'll set that up, and I did the stopwatch in a Bootstrap modal. So I'm just going to paste the code for that modal. Where we put that underneath slides. So this is our modal here. Is that formatted right? Yep. That's a bit weirdly formatted, but you know what we're going for. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's a standard Bootstrap modal. By default, when you open the modal, it's going to have zeros, and there's a button here to do something with that. And this is where this stopwatch JS library comes in. So now we can control that. So what we need to do is when the modal gets opened, I want to start the timer. Bootstrap have got some pretty cool events that you can say when, and I don't know if you saw or not, but that modal, I gave it a class of stopwatch modal. So stopwatch modal on shown, so that's when the modal pops up, we want to run this function. And that function will start the timer for us. And that function is here in the stopwatch.js file, start timer. So again, I won't go into detail on this, but there's a start timer and a stop timer method that we will be using in the page. So when the modal is shown, we want to start the timer, and then we want to do the same thing for when the modal is closed. So again, there's another Bootstrap event, stopwatch modal on hide. We want to stop the timer. Alright, so that's fine, but at the moment we're not actually popping that modal up. So what we need is a button which is going to show that modal for us. And that we will put up here underneath the slides element. So this is a button, again, some Bootstrap functionality. The data toggle modal attribute on this element binds it to the showing and hiding of a modal, and then the data target binds it to the selector for the modal. So it's class stopwatch modal, and this tells Bootstrap that it's going to be a button which shows that modal. Alright, so let's save that, go back to the page, let's refresh, and now we have, it's an empty page at the moment because we're still not showing and hiding the slides, but if I click go, we now have our modal, and the stopwatch has started, and if you've found the clues, you found the eggs from the clue, you say found them, and that drops the modal away, and now what we need to do is we tie that into moving on to the next slide. Okay, and the way we're going to do that is, if I come back here and we say go, so this button in the footer of the modal, not only do we want that on click to hide the modal, we also want to handle some functionality to navigate to the next slide as well. So we let's bring that in. So we're binding it to a button in the footer of the modal. So let's add that to our JavaScript. Okay, so in the modal footer, because this is our button here, in the modal footer, select the dot button, on click of that, do something. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep, we're going to track a variable which we haven't created yet, so let's do that. So that needs to be up here. So our current slide, we want to increment that so that we've moved on to the next slide, and then we want to write a function which is going to navigate us to that slide. So let's write that function. Okay, I'm just going to paste this whole thing in. Oops, what happened there? Alright, so this is our function, navigate slide, and we're passing a slide ID to it. So, checking to see if the slide ID is greater than 1, because if are we at the beginning or are we at the end, we need to do some different things. So if we're not at the beginning, then we're going to bring this in a minute, this button. But if we are at the end, we want to do something, and then we want to add a class to the slide body. We want to remove the class from the slide, which is the slide that we've passed into this function, and then we want to iterate the current slide variable to the slide that we are moving to, because what we did up here is we incremented the slide before we came to the method. So on click, we are moving to the next index of the next slide, and then we're doing something with that here. So let's save that. There's a few things we don't have which are included in that function. So let's bring those things in. We don't have that navigate left button, this guy. So let's bring that up, and we'll put that up here. So this is like a back button. And we don't have, what else don't we have? Oh no, we already have that, the begin button. I think that might be all that we need. Let's see what happens. So hit refresh. So it has to go off to WordPress and pull back the slides. So Shift F5. I suspect we still have all of our slides hidden. So if we look at our dev tools, our slides, So we really want this slide to not be hidden. Okay, I'm just going to dig into why that is. Just give me 1 second. Okay, I'm just going to tidy a couple of things up here. We actually want those variables outside of jQuery. Not that that's going to fix the issue that we have here. And also, we want the ordering to be right on our files as well. So what this is going to do is going to order the posts that come back from WordPress by the title. It's going to order them in ascending order, and it's just got some paging on it as well. So let's refresh that. We still have nothing. Okay, so let's click go, and found them. And something's not quite right here. Okay, so it's like the index is not being set correctly. Alright, so our body, we've got slides, we've got our button, we've got our modal. We're setting the variables for total slides and current slide. We're getting our WordPress data. We're setting up the events on the modal. And something that we didn't do was set up the event for the button. We're not seeing the button at the moment because we're still stuck on that first slide. So there's essentially a back button which will take you back to the previous, which is just pretty much an exact opposite of what we have here. So instead of incrementing the slide, we're decrementing it, and then we're doing the navigate again. That all looks fine. Navigate. Yeah. Our function to get our WordPress data. And that's exactly what I think I mentioned before. We're not setting up the initial index. So here, not in the each, after the each, we want to set the current slide to be 1 and then run the navigate to send us to the first slide. That looks better. So let's Shift F5 and see what we've got. And there we go. So this is going to be, if we go to the website, basketball should be, if we go back to our list of posts, I said before that we were sorting by title, and because they're numeric, or there's a numeric beginning for each of the posts, theoretically, fingers crossed, basketball should be the first slide, and it is. So that's the text. I just did some nice formatting on that. Obviously, this was for some kids. So grandma and grandpa were involved, uncles and aunties, and so on. So we tried to involve as many people as we could. So let's say go. So now they've read the clues. They go off to where they think the Easter eggs are. They find the Easter eggs. Now they say found them, and now we move across to the next slide. And this is number 2, which I'm hoping is swimming. Number 2 is swimming. And they continue going through, and you can see the back button here, which will take us back one. And we keep going through, all the way through to the end. I'll just go through them because I think we did something a little bit funky at the end as well. And the styling that you're seeing there of the text with the pink outline, the full screen size of the image, that's all done in CSS. So as I mentioned, I'm not going to go into the CSS. If you do want to see how I did that, you can always jump onto GitHub and you can see the repo and you can have a look at that CSS file. I think that was about 11 slides. So the Easter Bunny at the White House. A little bit of a political bent on some of these slides as well, just for the adults. Shooting. sure that that one's Commonwealth Games related. And then Trump with the Easter Bunny. So there you go. And what happens if we go here? We're back to the beginning again. So there you go. That's how we went about doing that. We used WordPress REST API so that we could nice and easy store and manage the content that we were going to show on the page. We used jQuery, we used Bootstrap simply for some scaffolding and some of the nice elements that it gives us, modals and so on, and some of the nice formatting on buttons. But the rest of it is just pretty simple JavaScript and stuff that anybody could do. So if you have any questions at all, feel free to hit me up. I'll answer as many as I can. Like I said, all of the code is available on GitHub. Again, I'll put that in the show notes. So thanks for listening, and if you like this, please tell your friends. Talk to you next time.